just because something's written down on paper or just because you say on Wednesday I'm going to go to the gym doesn't mean your body's actually ready to adapt to that.
Erik Korem, first thing I have to say is welcome. And then second, to my listeners, apologies, because we just turned on the Zoom and usually we do idle chit chat. But for some reason, you and I, man, we were going for it. And we're talking about like honesty and authenticity in the public arena and especially on podcasts. So I just want to welcome you to the show, and we'll go where it goes because we have some super cool topics of your areas of expertise. But tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I appreciate it, Brad. Thank you so much for having me on. And I really did. We were getting into some good stuff. We were getting into some Liver King things. We are getting into like some personal struggles, and that's what this is really all about. But a little bit about me. I do live in Houston, Texas right now.
That's Liver King country, man.
He's up the
road.
Yeah, he's north of here somewhere, kind of in like the Woodlands area or something like that. But for about 16 years, I worked in professional sports and college football as a sports scientist. And so if you've ever seen an NFL game or a college game and they're like, oh, such and such players running down the field at 20 miles an hour, that's the technology that I pioneered about 11 years ago and really introduced athlete wearables to NFL and college football, and kind of really did some really awesome things in that space. Went on and got a PhD studying something we may talk about later, but how to build this capacity to adapt to more stress. Because that's what we noticed, like with elite athletes, no matter what sport, they were phenomenal at adapting to physical and psychological stress. So I also worked in pro track and field for about 14 years, worked with a lot of 100, 200 meter sprinters.
Oh, my favorite, man. Those are my favorites.
Yeah, so Veronica Campbell-Brown.
Oh, yeah.
Worked with her, worked with Tyson Gay.
These are some of the best sprinters of all times, people of all times. I believe Tyson Gay is still number 3 of all time in the 100 meters, fastest humans of all time.
Yeah, I was with him, part of that group that was helping support him the year he broke the American 100 meter record. I was at the University of Arkansas. That's where I did my grad work. And they were all there at that time. And it was just kind of this serendipitous opportunity. They had turned pro after the Athens games. And specifically, Veronica had an immediate opportunity to start working with her going into the 2005 World Championships in Helsinki. And that's when it all started. And so that was an amazing journey. And then in I'd say almost 2021, I left all of that to start a company called AIM7. And we turned wearable technology data, like from your Apple Watch or Garmin device, into personalized, actionable recommendations for your mind, body, and recovery. Mm-hmm. So we moved past insights and data to like, what do I do today, to look, feel, and perform better? So that's what I'm doing now.
That sounds promising. Unlike some of the technology, I feel like is just fun and games and glitz. But if you can make some informed predictions, and if some watch was telling me, hey, dummy, your hormone levels are still elevated, you need a break or something like that, that would be superior.
Brad, I think you'll find this hilarious. I follow this girl on Twitter, and I can't even remember her name right now. I'm blanking, but she has just run like 115 consecutive ultra marathons.
Oh,
insane, right? And she wears a Garmin device, and the Garmin, after like 109, finally said, your body needs recovery. And the point of it was like, these devices, it's just data, and they're really not in tune with what's going on. And that's the nut that we cracked in pro sports, was like, we had these, you'll find this funny. So I went to Australia and was learning about what they were doing in Australian rules football. They were tracking players in games with GPS satellites, and they had accelerometers and all this crazy stuff. So I brought this back when I was at Florida State, and we're like, there was no playbook. We're duct taping this to the pads of the players. I hired a former NASA propulsion engineer because it was just like raw telemetry data. And after about a week, we've got so much data. Like, you could stack a room full of all this stuff. And our head coach was like, hey, Erik, what are we going to do with this? And I had no clue. And that didn't work out well. That was not a good thing. But that's kind of where the consumers are with all these Apple Watches and Oura Rings. It's like, great, I slept 7 hours, or I ran this far, my heart rate was this. Like, what do I do with it? So you're exactly right. It can be a waste of real estate on your body if it's not used correctly.
So AIM7 is something that can adapt to the various brands that are providing the data now, the leaders of whatever, Apple Watch, Garmin, and so forth.
Yeah, so we're end to end with Apple Watch, where we have Garmin, Oura, and a few other devices in about a month. But one of the things in 2015, when I was at the University of Kentucky, my graduate assistant, who's now the director of performance science there, Dr. Chris Morris, we did some very interesting research where we were able to demonstrate the technology is called fluid periodization. So whenever you have an athlete, you create what's called a periodized or structured plan for performance, which basically means that over time, the volume of work, the intensity of work, the frequency changes and is manipulated so you can reach a performance outcome. The problem
Did you make up that term?
No.
That's a fantastic term. I love it. Fluid periodization, because we're all familiar
with periodization. Yes, that is our term.
Made that up?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Chris coined that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So what the problem with that is, and as a former elite athlete, is that just because something's written down on paper, or just because you say on Wednesday I'm going to go to the gym, doesn't mean your body's actually ready to adapt to that. Because you could have had a great night or a terrible night of sleep. You could have gotten in an awful argument with somebody. You had a crazy work thing that happened, and so your gas tank could be full or empty. What we found is that if you could measure what we called biological states of readiness, and we could use some really sophisticated lab equipment to do this, if you adjusted somebody's workout, and we were using elite college football players, on the day, we would change their training program. The guys that used this model versus the guys that didn't had anywhere between 150 and 500% more improvement than the people training right next to them using the same program. So one of the things that we are delivering to the consumer population now is, and this is not for elite athletes, this is for anybody that exercises, we can tell you the exact type, intensity, and duration of exercise that your body is ready to adapt to based off of the habits that you already have. So if you track it, we'll categorize it. We're like, oh, you like to do yoga, you lift weights, you like to run, you lift weights. This will be like, today your body is ready for, let's just say, you like to do the elliptical. You should do the elliptical. You should do it for 35 minutes and stay in this specific heart rate zone. So we're getting like very granular with what your body is ready to do based off of your habits.
Kind of reminds me of my Carol Fit bike. Have you heard of the Carol bike? Where it's called cardiovascular optimized logic. It's like a Peloton bike with the screen and the guided workout, but it applies resistance, remembering how many watts you pushed at your last workout. So it's pretty fun, because during the 8-second sprints I did this morning, I was getting up to, what was it, 511 or something, I'm pushing 500 watts. It knows I can push that much. And so it gives me that much resistance. And then my wife lowers the seat and does her workout. And so they're challenging her to apply 200 watts during the same 8-second sprint. And
that's pretty cool. That's a really intelligent piece of equipment.
Yeah. It's been around for just a few years, and it's getting more popular. But that kind of stuff, is really appealing, especially being able to transcend that fixed mindset that we often apply to periodization. If the listeners aren't familiar with that term, like you described it, designing a year's training schedule, but then we rigidly adhere to it to our detriment when, we need fluid periodization.
That's exactly right. I'm going to have to look up this Carol bike. But for most people, if you're not doing anything, scientific literature is pretty clear. Anything is going to work up to some point. So if you're not exercising at all.
Yeah, that's called the spaghetti theory, Eric. You know that? The spaghetti theory, I named this, where you throw spaghetti up onto the refrigerator and the wet noodle will stick on the refrigerator. And so anything you do is going to give a fitness boost for a while. Sorry to interrupt, but we have to do some scientific terminology here. So
I love it.
Throw mine in. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. But eventually that spaghetti is going to fall off. And usually that's around 9 to 12 weeks, because it's early neurological adaptations, which most people, so like If you were to take a teenager or an early, somebody in their 20s, it's never exercised. Let's say never lifted weights before. The first about 9 weeks, most of the adaptations are neurological, and you may not even see a structural change. And then after that, you're going to start seeing more of these, what we would call like morphological adaptations to the muscles. So you're going to start seeing like hypertrophy of the muscle tissue. But the nervous system is the first thing that adapts. And that's why people are like, oh, muscle memory. There's no such thing as muscle memory. The muscle is just a dumb piece of meat. Right? It's the central nervous system that's driving, it's telling that muscle and through the afferent nerves like when to fire. And so these nerves you start creating more different pathways, you change motor unit synchronization, but it's really all neurological to begin with. And so like you said, if you're not exercising right now, just get out and do something. Your body's going to adapt and respond really quickly.
But the first in order of the student in the front row is the central nervous system. So you're not even going to pack on muscle until your brain starts learning how to lift weights for many weeks.
Yeah, it's kind of like a baby, like the baby, I have 3 boys, right? When they first start walking, is it that they need more muscle to walk? No, their nervous system is coordinating itself, and there's these feedback loops. The brain comes up with a process, it tries to execute it, the body falls down. Oh, that didn't work. It's basically a neural network. This is how AI works. So the feedback loop back to the brain is that didn't work, coordinate yourself this way, yourself this way. And then eventually the brain and the central nervous system along with the peripheral nervous system creates the right program to get the baby moving. Same thing if you haven't really, let's say, lifted weights before. You got to coordinate yourself. Then you start creating these adaptations where the body's like, oh, I can now coordinate. There's called intra and intermuscular coordination. So multiple muscle groups working together. So it's like, oh, these things need to fire at this sequence to be able to bench press a weight. And then the muscle itself can coordinate itself. And then it's like, oh, now I've created some early wins by coordinating the nervous system to do this. Now I need more muscle. And then you start seeing these more hypertrophy responses. But, man, we just went down a rabbit hole I wasn't expecting to go down.
That's great.
That's how it works.
And I would assume also when we hear this street banter that your central nervous system gets really fatigued from deadlifts, so you don't do that so much. And I never knew if that was scientifically legitimate or not, but it sounds like indeed,
yes,
the central governor, as Timothy Noakes calls it, is the thing that we really have to be sensitive to, not overstimulating, just like doing too many bicep curls and getting sore.
You nailed it. So if we go back to that research that we did a while ago, we would actually measure something called DC potential or direct current potential of the brain, which is a slow cortical potential. And it could basically tell us how the central nervous system was adapting to stress. So what we did was we would use that measure to regulate intensity, or let's just say how heavy the weight is, right? Then we would regulate volume or number of sets and reps, like using heart rate variability. So you're exactly right. It's often not intensity that's the problem, it's volume. So even if you're in a fatigue state, you could still maybe do one heavy set of a few reps to stimulate, but not annihilate the system. So like, in track, let's say we're working with a short distance sprinter, and maybe they're not in the optimal state of adaptation. We may go, you know what, instead of doing 4 60-meter sprints today, we're going to have a really long warm-up. We're going to do some extensive drills, and then we'll do 1 60-meter sprint to stimulate the nervous system and then shut it off. And the interesting thing about that paper that Chris did, Dr. Morris, is the commonality between the athletes that had these significant training improvements is they did less work, 10% less volume than the person next to them. So yes, really heavy deadlifts do tax the central nervous system. If you're not feeling great one day, but you're like, man, I really still want to go touch a little heavy weight, just warm up a lot, do one heavy set for very minimal volume, be okay. If you were to do repetitive sets of high intensity, that's when you're going to just bury yourself.
Yeah, it makes sense. So when you were working with these legends like Veronica Campbell-Brown, the great Jamaican who notably one of the fastest females of all time, but also had an incredibly long career for a sprinter.
Yes.
And Tyson was out there for quite a long time as well. Not as long as Justin Gatlin, but
Yeah.
some of the very best. What was the intervention and the results? Were these folks training in an indiscriminate manner, or they needed to pay more attention to recovery, or what did you notice with the elites?
You pointed out something very interesting. So Veronica, I was with her for a very long arc of her career. So let me speak to her. As she got older, and I'm not saying anything that would be compromising to her or anything like that, but, and this is true in general, working with, let's say, NFL athletes, guys that were in their mid-30s, right, still playing in the league, they didn't need very much volume of training.
As they got older.
As they got older, because there's orthopedic intolerance, and they couldn't handle as many of these very high-intensity days. So, like with a Veronica, maybe 1 to 2 high-intensity sprint days per week is all she needed. Everything else was like what we would do is like extensive or like tempo runs on grass that was very aerobic in nature, but maybe 1 to 2 really high intensity, because like when she goes fast, it's really fast. Most of us, when we think we're going hard, we're really not even getting close. The output that's generated is off the charts. And so it would cost her a bit more in adaptation time. And as she got older, we had to shrink the volume of what we call high CNS volume. This doesn't really translate to like the general population, except for I would say this: as you get older, it's very important to maintain strength. And if you've been training for a very long time, you're not going to need to do quite as much volume to maintain that. Now, when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, you can maintain muscle mass a lot easier. There's going to be a decrement over time, but you can maintain that much easier without frying your central nervous system.
How's that?
You can exercise in the 7 to 12 rep range, leaving 3 to 4 reps in the tank. You can do tempoed work. You can do like more eccentric loading, like 2-second concentric, 2-second eccentric. Have you heard of statodynamic exercise? This is something we would use with, you could use this with people that were in endurance athletes, and we would used it with field sport athletes. You would take 30% roughly of their 1 rep max for squat. So let's say you squatted 100 pounds, you'd use 30 pounds, right? And we would do 20 to like a 3-second lower, 3-second up, never locking out the joint. And you do this for 30 to 40 seconds. And you would rest, I think it was 30 to 40 seconds and repeat. It's not fun. It's very, very difficult. There is not a big orthopedic stress, but because of time under tension, you would get a tremendous hypertrophy effect, specifically type 1 muscle fiber. So we could hypertrophy these type 1 fibers with minimal central nervous system fatigue. There was a big metabolic demand, but it wasn't crushing their CNS.
30%, 1 rep max seems ridiculously light to me. It sounds like what I do in my morning exercise, where I'm just lifting a pretty light deadlift bar and doing 30 squat positions and 15 with the straight leg deadlift. And I'm breathing hard by the end, but it's so light. But again, the time under tension, it probably takes me 2 minutes total of holding on to the thing and moving it around. But I'm not expert in this, so I'm just challenging that. Like, you're working with a very light weight, but you can still get these huge boosts in hypertrophy.
Yeah, there's some really good research on it. Go try it out. Hold a dumbbell. So go stand up on 2 boxes, or use a belt squat, or you could do any upper body press. Do push-up. Push-up it's probably a little more than 30%. You may have to do it from your knees. But you would
do push-up where you just don't go all the way down, don't go all the way up.
Yeah, so
you would keep working that range. It's going to be tough, man.
Yeah, so with squat, we would have people hold a kettlebell that's about, or a heavy dumbbell. So it could be 100 pounds for somebody that squats quite a bit more, or as light as, 30 to 80 pounds. 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down. Do that for 30 to 40 seconds. Rest 30 to 40 seconds. Repeat that 4 to 5 times. Tremendous. I mean, it's not going to feel good. Trust me, you're going to be in a lot of pain from it's more metabolic accumulation of, you're going to have a huge amount of lactic acid. Blood flow gets occluded. But there's some solid research. What happens is you get this nice hypertrophy of type 1 muscle fiber.
Type 1 would be the most explosive fast twitch?
No, that's slow twitch muscle fiber.
Type 1 is the slow twitch, and then type 2A and 2B are the fast twitch and the oxidative fast twitch. Okay, so type 1 is the, you're going to grow in size or endurance or both?
Yeah, well, what's going to happen is when you hypertrophy that fiber, the more surface area you have, guess what happens? You get more to mitochondria. Now you can have more oxidation. Then you also get more capillary density. So these type 1 fibers become even more fatigue resistant. So you could do, like, Nordic skiers do this type of stuff. People that are middle distance runners, people that are doing cross country skiing, any type of like endurance event, hikers. I'll usually do
professional hikers. Yeah.
I mean, like if you're a backpacker, I'll do this before I go backpacking. I'm probably like 8 weeks out. I'll start doing this type of stuff because of also the eccentric load of coming down. When you go up a mountain, it's one thing. Coming back down, that's really when you get really, really sore. But we would do this type of stuff for those type of athletes. But it does lead to a pretty good hypertrophy effect.
So you were doing this type of protocol with the sprinters, and you're working hand in hand with their formally designated coach, or how did your technology come into like a program, like an NFL team or an elite group of athletes being coached by a sprint coach?
Right. So let's look at the, if you just take track, we had this thing called the coach, athlete, therapist triad. So it was so you have the strength coach, the performance coach, the track coach, and then you'd have a therapist. And that triad was really, really important because sprinters and track athletes are very sensitive. Their bodies are highly tuned. So oftentimes we would do like therapy on the track. But like, let's say we would have a plan, right? We write out an 8-week plan. Couple things that we would do is we would measure on a daily basis, and we'd be like, all right, if they're in this acceptable threshold, we'll just stick with the plan. If they're compromised, we may lower the volume. Let's say their HRV's down. We go, okay, we're going to lower the volume today. If we see a big drop in CNS, we may be like, today's going to be an extensive day. We're not going to do high CNS work.
What are you measuring? You're measuring HRV and anything else?
Yeah, like I said before, we would measure HRV and DC potential. At that time, we were using a device called Omega Wave. It's DC potential was used. DC potential and HRV started in the cosmonaut program for the Soviets because they wanted to understand long haul space flight using direct measurements, but something that was like not penetrating the skin. That's where HRV came from. If you actually Google Bayevsky stress index, that was one of the original measures of sympathetic nervous system like how sympathetic dominant the nervous system was, and you'll see it show up on NASA's website if you start Googling this stuff. So we would measure remotely in the morning. I would have a dashboard. I would see it. Me and the coach would talk about what was going to happen. They got really good over time. So we'd have like some basic heuristics or rules of thumb. As we were getting closer to peaking an athlete, that's when we would make major considerations. Also, you start learning how the body's adapting over a week. So maybe you start changing the way that you schedule your exercise. In team sport, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated because you have a lot of different people with a lot of different stressors, but they're also having to practice together. So what you'd want to do is create an environment where, for instance, like in football, one of the big adjustments over the years was teams used to do this. Play on Saturday, Sunday was off, Monday was a light practice. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was hard. Friday was off, and then they play on Saturday. What we started finding was these athletes had a hard time, especially if you played a night game on Saturday. It's been almost 48 hours since you've really kind of turned it on. And so they would come into the game kind of sluggish. Well, in track and field, I'll never forget this. For my first World Championships, the day before, what do? We do a shakeout. We go warm up. We get a couple easy block starts. I'm like, whoa, why are we doing this? Like, well, you got to keep some tone in the body. So we're like, oh. So what we started doing with football teams is we go, okay, Saturday we play. Sunday we do some active recovery. Monday we get moving. Tuesday was off. Wednesday, Thursday was hard. Like really, really hard. Sorry. Monday was a light day. Tuesday, Wednesday was really hard. Thursday was off. Friday, we'd go out and have a quick 45 to 60-minute practice the day before a game. Full warm-up, full field sprinting. And so now we've learned how the body's reacting. And so we were peaking athletes. And then they would go into Saturday feeling really fresh. And then you would use this type of technology for like one-off adjustments with key players. Because most teams, there's about 10 to 15 players that if they're good to go, everything's going to be all right. So you would really pay attention to them. Be like, hey, coach, they got a lot of volume in the game. It's a little bit tired today. Let's make sure we don't overcook them on Wednesday. Let's put at this point, we're going to pull them off the field. Okay, that makes sense. Does that help?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is, the cutting edge of tapering and peaking, which is so, it's difficult to nail. I had a hard time with it when I was a triathlete, trying to figure out that lead into the race. And I would do, some of these things were pretty effective that I learned over the years. One of them was I'd pretend that a big race was a week prior to what it was. And so the Boston Marathon's April 17th, Mark Bell's running it. I said, pretend it's April 10th, man, in your brain and in your training and in your mind. You just keep thinking of a week early, and then you're ready a week early. Because a lot of times what we would do is we train, and then taper the last 2 weeks, and you're exhausted for the final 2 weeks because you're finally, bottoming out from all that chronic fight or flight stimulation, especially an endurance athlete. And it was just hell. And then you're flying on an airplane, you're getting jet lagged, and you get to race day.
Travel can
and you're beat up. Yeah. Travel, we learned we had to taper for the airplane flights, just like we had to taper for a difficult workout or a race.
Are you still competing in these long endurance events?
No, now I'm completely flipped the script, and I'm a sprinter, a high jumper. My event, what used to be 2 hours long, the Olympic distance triathlon, and now the high jump's about a 3-second approach and 1 second in the air if I'm lucky. So it's really fascinating for me, just with the long time interest in sports, that now all my parameters have changed. And one of them,
I think it's smart too, because as you age, power drops off so much. And so you're stimulating all of the things that you're going to be losing the fastest. You must be a heck of an athlete to be able to traverse the spectrum of physiological requirements like this. I mean, you must be pretty special.
Well, I claim to be have been the highest off the ground of any ex-elite professional triathlete, which is not saying a lot, but it is a fun challenge. Of course, I'm genetically more adapted to endurance, and that's what I did in my youth. But now, as I face this challenge and try to compete in the 55 and over high jump division, the competition of attrition is wonderful, because there's no one there anymore. There's not many old guys that can bend over the bar. And so, these different disparate skills that have served me, like my continued interest in just general fitness, now I can, learn the technique. I'm obsessed with high jump technique. I love it. I want to have the best technique. I might not be able to go and dunk a basketball like a gifted high jumper can, but it's my own personal challenge. Same with running the 200 or the 400 meters. I have no business doing that against, an old Tyson Gay, or Willie Gault, in my case, is the world record holder in all the sprints. And he's an old time, for you listeners, he was an Olympic gold medal on the track and a longtime player for the Chicago Bears. And he's like a fitness machine at age 60, still as fast as a great high school sprinter as an old man. But, you have to shift gears, and my mentality had to change from this endurance mindset of struggling and suffering and enduring to focusing on precision, explosiveness, and particularly getting extensive rest in between your hard efforts. And that was so hard for my mind to embrace, because it's like, hey, I'm ready to go after a quick 20-second rest because I have so much endurance and I'm so tough. But it's like, no, that's not how you perform a sprint workout. You have to let the creatine phosphate system rebuild, where for a 5-minute rest period between a sprint that's as short as 100 meters. So that part's kind of fun, to embrace a whole different fitness protocol.
And I think if most people adopted some type of agile training, meaning they did something explosive, they did something for strength, they did something for hypertrophy, and they did something for, these various energy systems, it would serve them very, very well. Because as we age, we lose power, we lose strength, and all of these things are related to longevity. And so me personally, I'm 42, and that's what I do. I do something explosive, something for strength, one exercise for strength, maybe a few exercises for hypertrophy, and then 3 to 4 times a week I'm doing aerobic work, right? And I've noticed that I don't have to do as much strength work. I'm just touching it, right? And I'm not trying to put my body in a position orthopedically where I'm going to mess up my shoulder, because now I played college football. These things are creeping up.
Oh, boy.
And as you understand, but I think that most people kind of lose touch on touching some of these things like you just talked about. Like, you can do some jump on a box, step down, do 5 really explosive repetitions, minimize landing stress, and really work on being explosive, rest a couple minutes. Most people don't do this. Like you talked about the creatine phosphate system. We go from training, high intensity doesn't exist anymore. It's medium. You're living in the land of medium. And if we touch those things, those qualities are going to serve us well as we age.
I've also surmised that this obsession with cardio is deserving of more reflection. And in my case, I realized, I've jogged with my dogs every morning dating back decades when I was, training as an elite endurance athlete, but I kept that as part of my life. And I figured this is keeping me fit in my 30s and my 40s and my 50s. And then after a while, you realize like just the ability to go and do a steady state aerobic activity for a half an hour, it's better than sitting on the couch, but it's a really small sliver of the pie that represents total fitness, aging gracefully, warding off disease, and so forth. And I think there's a huge segment of the healthy, fit population that simply parks their car, goes in, checks in at the front desk, gets a towel, and then goes on the stair machine for 45 minutes watching TV, or, hoofs it with the dog around the block every day. And that's their fitness mindset. And to me, I realized how deficient I was, even as a retired professional athlete competing at the highest level. I thought a strength training session was 12 pull-ups on the pull-up bar, and that was it for the day. I had no concept that there was potential for mobility, flexibility, balance, explosiveness, sprinting, lifting a heavy weight, and, combining everything to achieve total fitness. And then I also realized that in the process of doing those other types of fitness, like explosive activity, whether it's sprinting or sprinting on a bicycle if you can't sprint on the ground, or lifting a heavy weight or going through the circuit at the gym, you're getting a fantastic cardiovascular training effect from that, similar or perhaps superior to trotting around the block for 30 minutes.
I was Googling something while you're talking here. There's a couple papers that have come out recently on what one of the terms, this is actually the title of the paper that was published in Exercise and Sports Science Reviews, Exercise Snacks, a Novel Strategy to Improve Cardiometabolic Health. There's some papers out of lab at the University of Texas. You just articulated something that I think is a serious problem, and that is that people all day sit down, they don't move, then they go to the gym, they get their 1 hour, and they're done. There's some very interesting research going on that's showing right now that if you don't move enough during the day, the cardiometabolic benefits of exercise aren't the same. So for instance, they found a threshold of, it was like 8,500 steps a day. So you could do like, I think it was a 45, I don't want to really screw up this paper, but I think it was around a 45-minute run. And during the day, they had people either walk below 8,500 steps. They had like different like bands of movement. And they found that postprandial triglyceride levels the next day were not lowered if they didn't move enough the day before. So the point of it is this, is like overall health and longevity comes down to not just like it's resistance training, like continuing to lift things heavy so that you maintain strength, maintain cardiovascular health through aerobic exercise or high intensity work, but you also have to keep moving. So going out, and there's a certain amount that we need to keep moving throughout the day. Our bodies weren't meant to be parked in front of the TV all day or sitting at our desks working on the computer. And I think that there's more and more of these studies, and also from the pandemic where people were isolated. There's some really cool papers that are starting to come out of that period too, to show what happens when you're in social isolation or you're in confined spaces for long period of times and what happens to your health. But yeah, this it's not just I need to do this 45 minutes a day and I'm done. It's movement, it's aerobic capacity, it's strength, it's all of these things blended together.
Yeah, and one thing that is relevant, especially as I get into the older age groups, is I realize my capacity for those badass workouts that give you the free pass to lay around the rest of the day. I can't even do those anymore without repercussions. What did you call it? Orthopedic stress or some...
Yeah.
That's the fancy term for like, shit, I keep getting too beat up when I do my track session. So I have to fly under the radar more. And I contend this is probably something that would benefit athletes in every age group, where you don't have to beat yourself up with these grueling, exhausting workouts, which I contend a lot of the fitness industry is doling out as inherently a very stressful workout protocol. And instead, if we just close the laptop lid and went and rushed up the staircase 4 times in the middle of the day, these things start to add up tremendously. I call them micro workouts, where you can actually get really fit without never signing in at the gym for an hour of pain and suffering.
You're exactly right. I mean, I totally agree. The term we would use sometimes is minimal effective dose, maximal orthopedic soundness.
Oh, nice.
So as you get
MOS, man.
There you go. Like,
yeah.
What is it that you have to do so that you're not suffering from the thing that you love to do? And that's the exercise snacks. Like every hour you should get up and do something. You should do 15 squats. You should go walk around the block. You should go up and down your stairs 4 times. I'll have to send you these papers offline. You could probably put them in the show notes, but that's what they're finding with these simple things that you're articulating. Usually practice is ahead, like practical application is ahead of research.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah. But it's people, these scientists are now like, hey, let's test and see if we do something every hour, if that changes things. And yeah, just get up and move frequently.
Well, also, evolutionary anthropology is very strong on this insight that the Homo sapiens evolved in a pattern of near constant movement throughout the day. So that's how we lived until the Industrial Revolution. Then we were maybe, sitting around and, still doing something hard in the factory. But, we've accelerated this sedentary pattern in recent generations. And previously, man, we had to walk down to the corner to get some more milk at the corner store or tend to our grounds. And, we were moving throughout the day, even our immediate ancestors, but definitely the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And so if this is our genetic programming, we can easily regain that without this entry barrier that I see in the fitness space where, I hate going to the gym and I don't like lifting weights and I don't like jogging. So you're on the sidelines. Whereas what about going up the stairs 4 times instead of 1, and all these ideas and things that we can put in our personal space to challenge the body.
I love it. It makes so much sense.
So you have all these disparate aspects to your career and your areas of interest and expertise. So I think I'd love to kind of change course a little bit and get into some of your insights about the glymphatic system in the brain. We might have heard the term bantered about here and there when we're talking about health, but it's really fascinating to me what happens when you sleep and how this glymphatic system will clean you up and keep you sharp and try to ward off that tremendous concern and fear we have about cognitive decline as we age.
Yeah, the glymphatic system, it's been in the past 10 to 15 years that neuroscientists actually found this, because your body has something called a lymphatic system, right? It's kind of this metabolic waste removal system, okay? Well, the brain doesn't have that. What it does is it has these perivascular pathways that at nighttime, so what happens is the glymphatic system enables the inflow of cerebral spinal fluid into your brain, and it mixes with interstitial fluid in the brain, and eventually it's transported out by the central nervous system using these traditional lymphatic vessels that kind of surround these what are called meninges. Long story short, this system is only active when you sleep. And so what happens is when you go to bed at night, particularly during slow wave sleep or deep sleep, the glymphatic system is active and it's flushing out all this metabolic waste products. One of the things that's coming out is something called amyloid beta, which you kind of hinted at, which is associated with neurodegenerative diseases and cognitive decline, such as Alzheimer's disease. What's really interesting is the National Sleep Foundation says that the average adult gets about 35% of adults are getting more than 7 hours of sleep a night. So we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. That's kind of where the research is pointing to, that's what the average person needs. If you think you're the person that can go on 5 hours, you're most likely not. You probably do not have that genetic polymorphism.
Right. I love that research where there's somewhere around 1% or an extremely, maybe less than 1% have this SNP that really designates them as a short sleeper. I contend my wife might be one of those people, because she seems to be robotically able to go anywhere between 5 and 9 hours of sleep. But it's like only 1% or less have it, and then 15% believe that they are an adaptive short sleeper, which is a little
and they're not.
Gap there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of people say that they're a night owl, and genetically only 9% of people really are.
How many? What'd you say?
Only about 9%.
Oh, okay. So there is a 9% night owl scoreboard. Okay.
Yeah. There was a paper that was done by the B.rad Institute at MIT and Harvard, and they looked at around 800,000 people in the UK Biobank, and then they used 23andMe data and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that kind of tumbled out of this paper was some research on how going to bed later impacts your risk for major depression. And they found that, let's say you go to bed past like midnight, you really want to be asleep before midnight. If you just rolled your sleep back 1 hour, there was a 23% reduction in major depression. If you rolled it back another hour, it was almost a 40% decrease. Now, this is for people that are going to bed really, really late at night, or really in the morning, 1 or 2 a.m. And out of all of this amazing data set that they collected, which also included activity tracking and all this stuff, they were actually genetically able to parse out that only about 9% of people are really night owls. And one of the interesting things was, like, okay, why is it that people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier have this lower risk of depression? And they traced it all back to, if you understand anything about circadian biology, the primary anchor for your circadian clock, or what's called the primary Zeitgeber or time giver, is light. And people that wake up earlier and they go outside to get more natural exposure to light versus people that sleep in longer. And that kicks off a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that dramatically impacts your mood. So anyways, we kind of got off course there. But I was trying to draw this line, though. It's really interesting that we're seeing this decline in how much sleep people are getting. And we're seeing this increase in the dementia cases. And it's doubling every 5 years. And they expect by 2060 that 14 million people are going to have this disease. Well, if we now understand that the glymphatic system is operating at sleep during when you sleep at night, this is when all this metabolic junk is getting flushed out. If you occlude this process by not getting enough sleep, what are you doing? You're packing in this amyloid beta. And so if we're chronically getting less and less and less sleep as a society, and we're seeing more and more and more of these neurodegenerative diseases, I'm not saying it's causation, but there's some interesting data there to start pointing to the fact that our lack of sleep is impacting our brain health. So I just started digging a lot on this subject, and I was like, wait a second. People were sleeping this much in the early 1900s, and there were lower, and then it started, oh my gosh, this is kind of an interesting trend we're seeing.
Is there any contention on this stats where, because our life expectancy is, we're living longer, and is that part of the reason for the increase, or is this a straight up age-adjusted
people older than 65?
Yep. Right. So that's highly disturbing that we're seeing the graph spike up and double every 5 years, you said.
Yeah, that's what's going on right now. We're also seeing, an alarming increase in mental health issues, which can be, there's a number of factors that could be leading to that. But I think it's something for us to pay attention to. Definitely want to be doing the things that are within our control. Exercise, we know now how aerobic exercise impacts brain health with BDNF and different things like that. Getting enough sleep. But I'm interested to see where the research goes, but they're just like, why wait on the papers? Do the things that are healthy for you, right?
Yeah, I think Dr. Doug McGuff, author of Body by Science, former podcast guest, he says, look, in 20 years, the science will all come around to reveal this. I think we were talking about the need to ditch processed foods and embrace the ancestral eating pattern of wholesome, healthy, nutritious foods and a broad spectrum of including animal foods that sometimes are maligned. And he said in 20 years it's all going to be proven, but I don't want to wait that long. I don't know about you. And it's a pretty powerful insight, because a lot of people seem to become entrenched in whatever it is, their camps, their belief systems, and the dogma, and the clock is ticking meanwhile. So, I'm in favor of experimenting and putting into action, testing things out and seeing if you might be able to sleep better tonight by eliminating alcohol from your diet or whatever it is, and then make your own conclusion, regardless of what the science says. And we also know we have a lot of flawed science to navigate.
100%. I couldn't be in more agreement with you. And we know that people fudge papers too.
Yeah, to pile on one more, I think you'll appreciate this, referencing Tyson Gay and Veronica Campbell-Brown. I highly respect science and the people that are devoting their life's work to the fields of exercise physiology and so forth. But I want to go knock on Tyson Gay's door and find out what he's doing when he runs the 100 meters in 9.69. And that is going to I would say trump, or at least be on equal legitimacy to whatever scientific discovery we can find about training the human to run at high speed. And I think we kind of we discount that a lot. I remember some article about Usain Bolt where they referenced the number of times that he called himself lazy, or his coach called him lazy, over his career. And then the person digging into this realizing that perhaps the average or the majority of sprinters have been extremely overtrained dating back to the 60s. And here's a guy who knew how to take an off season and go out to the discos and be guest DJ and then come back and peak for these major events over and over, perhaps because he was inclined to not overdo it, but perhaps underdo it and need a little bit of goading from the coach. So maybe one of his success formulas was being quote unquote lazy, where it's always seen as a denigration.
I couldn't agree more, especially in a sport like that where it's very much a linear process. It's not like a field-based sport or tennis or something where the repetition of reacting to an opponent, it's pure output, right? Mixed with some technique. And if you're trying to push the limits of a pure, like shot putter, right? It's a pure output. Once you kind of have the technique refined, it's output, 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 output. You don't, like, if you're constantly over volumizing somebody, you're limiting their capacity to achieve new limits. And so, yeah, that's a very wise perception on that.
You also talked, before you let you go, one of the most important concerns about preventing disease and aging gracefully is this concept of social isolation that we're hearing more and more, especially put into focus by the quarantine. But I wonder how that fits into where we have a lot of people trying to, hit the checkpoints with buying the right food and getting out there and exercising, but we're becoming more and more isolated, driven by technology, among other things.
Yeah. There was actually a paper published by the British Psychological Society that was done. It was looking at people during pandemic lockdown periods. And they found that greater social connectedness during these periods was associated with less worry and fatigue, lower perceived levels of stress. Basically, it created a buffer. By staying connected to humans, created a buffer against poor physical and mental health outcomes. And there was a paper we were talking about right before we got on here that just came out of the University of Kansas. And I want to read this because I don't want to screw this up. And it demonstrated that one meaningful conversation a day boosts mood, lowers stress, and enhances social connectedness. So what's a meaningful conversation? Simply, this is what the author said, simply catching up, joking around, listening to someone, offering a sincere compliment, showing care, valuing someone's opinion. Now, here's the interesting caveat. Face-to-face communication was significantly more effective than electronic forms. So DMs and texts just don't count. We are designed for this human-to-human interaction. And when we don't have it, we lose that buffer. And I would also say a caveat there is like actually listening to somebody, and like it said, like offering a sincere compliment. When something is sincere, it means you've thought about it, right? It's pure in attention. Showing care, like to show somebody care means that you're thoughtfully thinking about somebody else. And I would add a personal flavor into this is like when you connect with somebody, try to take the spotlight off yourself and shine it on them. And really try to do it from a standpoint of like love and tenderness and care. We have 5 pillars in AIM7: sleep, exercise, mental fitness, nutrition, and community. And the scientific literature is becoming more and more clear that those 5 things are not only what lead to improved longevity, but they increase your capacity to adapt to stress. So you're not always operating at this like burnout stage, right? You have more gas in the tank for the journey of life. And so 100%, I'm excited to see more scientific literature come out. But again, we don't need that. There was actually, I will say this one, there was a paper that was really interesting. Have you heard of Bruce McEwen? You would love this guy. So Bruce McEwen really changed our perception in the world of science on stress and adaptation. He's the one that came up with the terms allostasis and allostatic load. So allostasis is the body trying to achieve stability through change or achieve homeostasis. Allostatic load is whenever you encounter a stressor, there is a cost to adaptation. Okay, so physical stress, relational stress, get sick, whatever. Whenever you experience a stress, or it could be financial stress, there's a cost of adaptation. There was a wonderful paper that was looking at the things that you can do to improve your ability to adapt to allostatic load. Going back to this community thing, I was just looking at my notes. It was 5,400 people over 18 years regularly attending different faith communities. So they didn't say it was a certain faith. It was just faith communities. Lowered allostatic load. They had a 55% reduction in all-cause mortality, controlling for sociodemographic, clinical, and laboratory factors. The commonality between faith communities is that people are usually kind of in close connectivity. They're meeting on a regular basis, right? So whatever your faith belief is, doesn't matter. The point is like, it's a pretty interesting study of like you talked about coming together on Thursday night to watch the show, going back to our earliest part of the conversation. That's living in community. Like,
yeah, I was talking about the old days, people before the streaming entertainment and being, isolated, that we would have these social gatherings and we'd have to watch the show live on Thursday night. LA Law was a favorite one back in LA. And like, there was no streaming back to the previous
Murphy
episode.
Brown.
If you missed Thursday night at 9 p.m., you were host. And so it was, just a reflection of how different things are now, where you can, sit in your bed with your mobile device and catch up on the previous 4 streaming episodes that you missed. And as you mentioned, pushing that bedtime back by an hour or two and screwing everything up the next day. But we're inundated with, the potential for distraction and isolation, I guess we should admit.
No question. And I think it's wonderful that people, these different mediums like your podcast, right? Like people are coming together to listen to what you're having to say. It'd also be great if people in your podcast community would connect with each other, which
one of those conventions. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it just creates some type of connectivity around the message that you're spreading, which is wonderful. And we have more ways to do this now with technology, but I think we need to take these digital relationships and turning them to IRL, in real life, right? As long as it's safe, I'm not trying to say go meet people in these weird chat rooms, but you know what I'm talking about. Like, take digital from people in your community, and if you're in a community of people online that loves to go do Frisbee golf, why don't you go do Frisbee golf together?
I mean, that's the original dream, I think, for the well-meaning scientists that invented this stuff, is to create this tremendous source of connection. And, I love watching high jump videos, but I even more enjoyed going to a meet and meeting another old man high jumper, my man Eben, who is number 1 in the world right now in the 60-plus division.
Let's go, Eben.
It's really cool to mix and match and use the power of technology to, I guess, the dating apps and the online dating is a huge industry, and it's wonderful in so many ways to make these connections. But I think the whole point is like to have a physical experience. Once you sort through the swiping and the prospects, it's like, hey, let's meet at Starbucks. Let's quit chatting back and forth and get it over with,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, all these areas that we discussed are rolled into AIM7. Maybe you should plug this technology and how people can learn more, and especially if they're already in the wearable scene, how to optimize the use of such data that they're getting already.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, if you have an Apple Watch or a Garmin or anything like that, or a Ring, we're taking that data and we just make it useful and actionable for, like I said before, your mind, body, and recovery. So your body, we talked about that fluid periodization stuff earlier, we make that very accessible. We built this app for busy people that don't have time for downloading spreadsheets and going through the data. It's like, what do I do today for my body, for your mind? It could be like, oh, we noticed that your stress is high, maybe your mood's off. We'll push you the type of breathwork tool that you need in the moment, or that gratitude thing that you need right now. The average person in their first 30 days using AIM7 has about a 31% reduction in perceived stress. They do 38% more workouts. They're 19% less sore. They sleep better. Their motivation's better. There's a lot of things that we've built in this app. We went out and got some of the best performance psychologists in the world to help us. We use this medium to help people pursue very long-term goals for their health. And we have a really cool process that we take people through. So the first month, you'll get 4 Zoom calls with me and my team. This doesn't cost much. It's $15 a month. And so we're not in the App Store. It's private beta, which means you have to sign up online. We'll put you into a cohort. We start them every few weeks. And then you'll come in with a group of 50, 100, 200 people. And then we'll have these Zoom calls. We'll take you through this process. And right now, a top tier app in the App Store, you get about a 30% daily active user rate. I mean, somebody's going to use your app. 30% of 100 people will use it every day. Over 75% of people using the app are using it every single day because it's adding that much value. So it's kind of a culmination of the work of a lot of people that are like, you know what, let's take this stuff that elite athletes were using and let's make it accessible to anybody with a wearable device.
Fantastic. What a pitch, man. I'm in. Well, I love it. I'm gonna have to dust off my my Garmin golf watch, which I only wear for golf, but I gotta bring it into my life a little more.
You got a free membership. You got a free membership.
You know, I appreciate you and your amazing work, especially, you know, bringing that experience with the elite performers of the world and then creating some way to share it with the masses. I think that's what one of the best, you know, contributions that the top athletes have is they're showing us what's possible, and then somehow we have to adapt that into our experience. So AIM7, having that aim is wonderful, and maybe we'll get you on the show sometime in the future. We'll have fresh topics to discuss because very, very interesting insights.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I would love to come back.
All right, Dr. Erik Korem, people, go look at AIM7. We'll have a bunch of links in the show notes. Thank you for listening.